You're good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're good. You're perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways. Oh, you're perfect in all of your ways. To us. Oh, you're perfect in all of your ways. Oh, you're perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways. To us.
Well, I'm excited about this. I know you've heard me talking about the beginning of this 3-week series, and I'm really excited. I think too, you get to know somebody when you break bread with them, and I had a wonderful chance with our mutual friend Marty to break bread with Rabbi Yogi and get to know him, and then had a wonderful opportunity. Marty's oldest daughter just had her bat mitzvah before the holidays, and so had a chance to hear that. And Rabbi Yogi does their learners class, and the way he really kind of opens up the Torah and tells the story, and on Jacob's ladder, it was wonderful and really great insight. Now, to give you some background on Rabbi Yogi, he studied at New Israel Rabbinical College in Baltimore and received his master's degree in education and administration from Loyola University. But that's not who he's about. He is born in Israel. His mother knew that he would be a rabbi, and they wanted to make sure he didn't take himself too seriously, but took God very seriously. So they named him Yogi after his dad's idol, Yogi Berra. So, and so it's with great pleasure that I invite Rabbi Yogi to come up and speak to us today on the relationship between God and Abraham.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Eric, and thank you all for having me here today. And it's truly a pleasure to be here. Beautiful singing that you guys have going on here. It's really it's a marvel to behold. It's very, very beautiful. The relationship between, Abraham and God. And by the way, let me just tell you, when I speak usually, it's not usually, I guess, in the classical sense where I'm talking and then everybody just listens. Eric, who is at my learner service, knows it's very much a participatory kind of environment. So feel free, if you have a question, if you have something that you want to add, if you have some particular area you want me to digress into, or just anything, feel free to just raise your hand or just say it. So I look forward to going into this with you in depth. And Abraham really is the great connector, I think, really between the three monotheistic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, because, of course, Abraham, his name in Hebrew, Avraham, means the father of many nations. So we're a nation. There are other nations out there. Abraham is the great connector. But the question really is, who is Abraham? And what is the relationship that he has with God? And I'll tell you what makes it so fascinating is the fact that we know almost nothing about the man. We know almost nothing about the man. The famous test, how many of you know what was the very first test? Abraham had 10 tests that God threw his way. Not the SATs or the ACTs. 10 different tests he threw Abraham's way. Does anybody know what was the very first test that Abraham was given? Anybody know? Leave your home. Leave your home, that's exactly right. Genesis chapter 12, it's right there. And God said to Abraham, go for yourself from your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. That is test number 1. Culminates all the way in test number 10 when he's told to sacrifice Yitzchak, Isaac, It's a pretty difficult test. Test number 10. Some of us feel that's not such a test, those of us with children. 10 tests. So leave the land that he knew. That's test number 1. How old was he? 75. He was a whippersnapper. 75 years old. What do we know about Abraham before? Now, this is a question that I've had really for many, many years, which is, what was so special about Abraham that God decides to choose him to be the father of many nations? What was it about Abraham? We know nothing. The Bible, or what we call it, the Torah, is silent. All we know about it is his lineage, that he has a father whose name was Terach, and that his wife, whose name is Sarai, later on she gets her name changed to Sarah. She gets the yud at the end, Sarai, changed to Sarah in order for her to be able to have children. She's barren. We know that she has to go with Abraham and her father-in-law to the land of Canaan. And then we're told, the next thing you know, he's 75 years old, and God says, test number 1, here we go, buddy. Go to the land that I'll show you. But we know nothing about him. I mean, why was he chosen? Was he special? What did he do with his life? The Torah is silent. And the silence is deafening, because this is our forefather. He's chosen, and we have no clue why. Where's the backstory? For those of you who like Star Wars and all these different kind of movies, what do they call it? The Genesis story? What do they call it when you have to go back to find out how it all started? What is that? The Genesis story or the prequel or whatever it is. There is none of that. All we get is Abraham and God go to the land that I'll show you. Who is Abraham? Why did you choose him? Nada. Pretty wild. Now, for those of you who've ever heard of the oral tradition in Judaism, it's called the Talmud, or specifically the non-legalistic part is called the Midrash. The Midrash is replete with all sorts of stories about Abraham's youth. And so for those who have never learned the Midrash, you're left with a gaping hole in the Abraham story. And all you hear is, boom, God chooses this person. It almost feels like some sci-fi drama. There's this guy walking in the cornfields, and an alien ship comes over, and there's a light coming down. You! That's truly what the story feels like. So the Midrash fills in a lot of those details. The Midrash says that when Abraham was just 3 years old, he looked out at the world and he saw the complexity of the world, and he said, if I look at a palatial estate, if I go to a beautiful home or a beautiful palace or a mansion, and I look at it and I say, there must be an architect who built this. This couldn't have just happened upon itself, happened on its own. There must be some great creator. There must be a great builder. And Abraham, already at the age of 3, started having these incredibly deep philosophical insights that there must be a creator that created us, that created the world, the complexity that is the world. That's God. There must be one God. And already at the age of 3, he starts having these very, very deep philosophical thoughts. The Midrash also tells us that Abraham's father was in the idol business. Now, I was recently in New York, and I got to go to the Met to go see some of these ancient artifacts, and you see these idols, the fertility gods, the Asherah, which is one of the idolatrous practices. They have one there in the Met. I got to see it. It's a tree god. Okay. Abraham's father was in the business. He had an idol store, says the Midrash. Idols are us. Buy 2, get 1 free. So he had an idol store, and Abraham said, no. One God, not pantheons of gods. By the way, if you ask an idol worshiper how they're doing, you know what they tell you? Thank gods. That one's on the house, by the way. So Abraham had a father, Terach, and so Terach has this incredible idol store. And Abraham says, no more. I've had this great philosophical insight, one God, not many gods. And so the Midrash tells us that he gets out a hammer and he starts hacking away at all these idols, destroying them. He leaves only the biggest idol left, and he puts the hammer in the idol's hand. And he leaves. So Terach comes back, his father, and he sees his store is smashed to smithereens. All the idols are broken except for the big one. And he says, Abe, what did you do? And he says, I didn't do it. He did it. He says, what are you talking about? That thing's made out of clay. It can't do that. He says, and you would think it a god? And that's what the Midrash says already. So we have this entire backstory of who Abraham was in the Midrash, that he has this great philosophical insight at the age of 3. He goes on an idol rampage when he's a child, destroying his father's idol shop. So we see this is someone really special, somebody who's really not afraid to stand up for his belief systems. He's going to be the one who's going to lead the way, so to speak, out of the darkness that is this world into a brand new light of people that understand that there's a God and they're going to worship God and leave idolatry, on and on and on. But the Torah doesn't tell us any of these details. It's all left for the oral tradition. And the question begs itself, why? These are great stories. I mean, how many of you like the story of the idol shop? Wouldn't you want it right here in print? Why is it not there? What about his great philosophical journey? Okay, he was the original Plato. Okay, why wouldn't you want that story? He's 3 years old. He wakes up, he looks out, he says, wow, this world is so complex. It's got to have a maker. It's got to have a creator, an architect behind it all. I mean, wow, this person's a thinker. He's a philosopher. He's a philosopher king. Not there. All we hear, we wake up, he's 75 years old, and God's like, you go to a land that I'll show you, without any backstory. Why not? What do you think the lesson of the fact that the Torah is silent about his upbringing and only starts the story from his test, his mini tests? What is that teaching us? Anybody have any idea? Any suggestions? What do you think the message is? What's that? Faith. So why not tell us how he came to that faith? Why start with just the story of having to rely on that faith to go on that journey? Why not tell me how it all started? Why did God choose this person? To not have you question. Let it be. Okay. It could be that I'll tell you my problem with that is an idolater could say the same thing. Just go with it. Just go with it. What's the difference? Why is my faith any more valid than your faith? Abraham had come to some deep understanding that his faith was genuine and the others were not. I want to understand those philosophical arguments. Yeah. Okay, it's not as important how he started, it's more important to see what he did with it. Okay, good. Any other answers? Yeah. Okay, it's really a matter of obedience. We don't really care how you got there, so to speak. Okay, yeah. Okay, God can choose anybody anytime. Maybe there's a great lesson there. I like that. Maybe you are the next Abraham. I feel like there's a new church opening up in, what's your name? David? Oh, David. Whew, the Davidic dynasty. Woo! Oh my gosh. This is getting dangerous. Well, it's interesting. I happened to notice this morning on one of the quotes that you had up there on the wall, that you actually quoted a verse from Genesis which actually says, why did God choose Abraham? Now, even though it doesn't tell us these stories about when he was a child and the story of Abraham in the idol shop, it does tell us what was unique about Abraham. And here's what it says. And this is when the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, what we say in Hebrew, Sodom and Gomorrah, God's going to destroy the city because of all the wicked people. And here's the verse. It's in Genesis 18:17. And God said, "Shall I conceal from Abraham what I do? Shall I not tell him that I'm about to destroy the city? Now that Abraham is surely to become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by him. For I have loved him." Why? And listen very closely, folks. What is unique about Abraham that God chooses him? Because he commands his children and his household after them that they keep the way of God, doing charity and justice, in order that God may then bring upon Abraham that which he had spoken of him. In other words, what was unique about Abraham? We don't have the backstory, but you know what God tells us? I chose him because he teaches his children. Perfect timing. He teaches his children charity and justice. This was an ethical warrior. We don't have the backstory. We don't know his deep philosophical insights when he was but a babe. But you know what we know? This person plans on raising a family dedicated to ethical values, charity, justice. That's what God tells him. And he says, how can I withhold from him that which I'm about to do to Sodom and Gomorrah? And by the way, why specifically Sodom and Gomorrah should I not hold back? Because that's a question of, is this right or not? Is it fair to destroy a city? Abraham, in fact, when God tells him I'm about to destroy the city, what does he argue? Maybe I could find some good men in that city, good men and women. And he says, maybe I'll find 50, 40, 35, 30, 35. It's like an auction. He was a Texan. And finally he gets down to 10. Maybe I could find 10 men in that city. Would you destroy the city if you had 10 good people in the city? And God says, no. Find me 10 good people, I won't destroy the city. Of course there weren't. And we know how the story ends. But the point was, I cannot withhold what I'm about to do to Sodom and Gomorrah because this is an ethical question. Can the good suffer along with the evil if the evil are the majority? And they come to a conclusion that as long as there are 10 good people, I can't. But I've got to have that discussion with Abraham because he is the man when it comes to ethics and values. I chose him because he's going to teach his children and his children's children about charity and justice. So when it comes to an ethical dilemma, should I destroy the city if there's some good people? And I've got to talk about this with the king of the ethics. So I don't know the background story, but I know that God says this is a person who's dedicated his entire life to ethics and values. This person is an ethicist. And I remember, by the way, why 10 people? Why 10 people? What's so special about the number 10? Now, by the way, anybody who comes to a synagogue will know that in order for us to do certain prayers, we have to have 10 men there. Less than 10, we can't do it. 10 is like a really big number in Judaism. Why 10? 10 is considered a community. And there are only certain things you can accomplish, not by yourself, but in a community, like you have here. There's certain things you can't accomplish as a loner. You've got to have a community. If there are 10 men here, we've got a community. And that's really what Abraham was arguing to God. He said, I can't go less than 10. Because if I've got 10, I've got a community. You know what a community can do? They can impact the entire city. But if all I have is individuals, I can't expect them to turn around Sodom. If I've got a community, I've got hope. So he doesn't try to bargain down past the minion, past 10. 10 is the bottom. Now, I grew up learning about Abraham. Abraham was the one who taught the world monotheism. And that was really what was unique about Abraham. That was his gift. He taught the world monotheism. And certainly the story that I talked to you about, the Midrash, that he's 3 years old and he starts thinking, there must be a creator, certainly gives credence to this idea that Abraham is the first monotheist. But is that true? Is Abraham the one who teaches the world about monotheism? Is he the first monotheist? He's not. Adam speaks to God. Noah speaks to God. They got a whole nice crew of people that speak to God, and they know there's one God. What's unique about Abraham is not the fact that he recognizes that there's one God. What's unique about Abraham is that he understands now that there's one God, how does that impact us? See, it's one thing to understand philosophically there's one God. It's a whole nother thing to say, and therefore that puts expectations upon us. That's a whole different ballgame. And Abraham's great contribution is not monotheism, but ethical monotheism. And that's why God chooses him. Isn't that exactly what the verse says? Because he's going to teach his children charity and justice. He's adding something to the monotheism game. It's not enough to just know there's one God, because you know what I could do? I could say, okay, there's one God. One God. I don't know your name. Let's just call you One. I need corns in my field, and I need my cows to be healthy, and I need my kids to be healthy, and my wife to be healthy, and I need to win the lottery, $540 million. I want all these different things. And it becomes basically like the great Superman in the sky. That's one way that you could approach God. God's basically this giant Santa Claus in the sky. You know, give me, give me, give me, give me. And that's one way. And by the way, idolatry was all about that. Idolatry was all about self-serving. If I give you this sacrifice, what will you give me back in return? A barter system. Well, one God could be the same. Okay, great. We got rid of the other 9,999. We're on to something. But guess what? We're still playing the same game. It's all about us. What can you, God, give to me? Abraham said, no. One God is just how many there are. But there's something much deeper about the fact that there's one God. And it's the fact that this one God is a loving God. This one God is a good God. This one God is a charitable God. This one God is a just God. This one God clothes the naked. This one God buries the dead. This one God does all these amazing things. And you know what? We have to be God-like. And to become God-like, it means I have to incorporate all of those values, all of those character traits that God has into me. Charity and justice. I'm going to teach my children. And God says, you're my man. He says, if you're going to teach your children charity and justice, you figured out what this whole one God thing is about. It's not just a numbers game. It's about expectations. I was named after Yogi Berra, who of course is a baseball player, and it sounds a little funny, but I always tell people, human beings, it's in our DNA to worship. The question is only what. For modern boys and girls, oftentimes it's a celebrity or a sports star. It's a form of worship, folks. It's important to recognize that. There's a reason why when your sports team loses, thank God mine won last night, I'm from Atlanta. But, I remember coming to a certain point, and I'm a big sports fan, where I realized it really is only a game. It really doesn't change anything. Listen, would I have wanted Atlanta to win the Super Bowl last year? Of course I would. It would have been great. But in the end of the day, did anything change? Did the world change in any way because they didn't? No. It really is just a game. But we grow up imagining that these things have real worth and meaning. Like if my team wins this week, I won and the world is good. And if they lost, the world is just shot. And by the way, it's amazing because anybody who's in nonprofit like myself knows that this famous fundraising rule. You don't ask for charity on a week where the local team lost. And you think I'm kidding, but that's actually true. They've done studies on this. People are less generous because they're down. They're losing. We worship false gods. And so we're made to worship. Now the question is, what are we going to worship? Are we going to worship celebrities, sports stars, the mighty dollar? Or are we going to worship God? That's the question. And Abraham says, let's take that natural human inclination to worship and let's worship God. But when we worship God, what are you always doing when you worship someone? You're saying, I want to be like Michael Jordan. I want to be like that movie star. Or when it comes to God, I want to be like God. That's called being godlike. And Abraham said the knowledge that there is one God alone is not enough. It's that we have to worship God, which means to say we have to want to be like God. And so what Abraham brought to the table was not monotheism per se, but ethical monotheism. It's a monotheism with expectations. It's a monotheism that says, now that I know that this great God is up there, I've got to be like him. I've got to be just, kind, charitable, etc. And those are the stories that the Bible is filled with. Not the stories of when he's a kid, but the story of the 3 Arabs that are walking in the desert 3 days after his circumcision. He was not, you can imagine, in the best of health. He was an old man. He had a circumcision. The Torah, if you look, is very careful. It says the sun was shining bright that day. And the oral tradition says, you know why? Because God took out the sun and made it really, really bright, because Abraham was Mr. Hospitality. He was Mr. Hospitality before Hilton was even around. And he knew if there were people wandering around in the desert, Abraham would be there with his Ozarka water bottles and his, falafel and all the good things that he would have been ready to offer all the wayfarers. And he said, let me make it a really hot day. And that way I won't trouble him, I'll just let him heal. But he saw Abraham was suffering. There's nobody to help. What am I to do? I mean, I'm a person who my life is all about being godlike. I want to help, I want to do kindness, I want to be like God, I want to be there for other people, and there's nobody here to help. Where's Mahmoud and, all these Arabs? I need some Arabs. And so God sends 3 angels, because there's nobody going to come out on a day like today. So I've got to send 3 of my men. And of course, Abraham, in the height of his pain after the circumcision, serves them, and he's running around like a madman, making sure that they have all this good food, and he's washing their feet. That's what we know about Abraham. Ethical monotheism. Being godlike. We know that he fights for the people of Sodom. If there's only 10 men, how could you destroy that city? It's a city of sinners, a city of terrible people. It doesn't matter. I want to save them. If there's only 10 men, maybe they can turn it all around. We see the story when he's with his nephew. And his nephew has a lot of sheep, and he's got a lot of sheep, and they're together in the same land, and it's not going to work. This land ain't big enough for the 2 of us. And Abraham says, you know what, you choose. If you want to go to the right, I'll go to the left. If you want me to go to the left, you go to the right. I'm willing to sacrifice. You just be happy. These are the stories that we hear about Abraham. And here's really the lesson, folks. The Torah, the Bible, doesn't demand of us, and maybe this is what you were thinking about, it doesn't demand of us that we all be theologians. We don't have to be the next Kant. We don't have to be people that were able to explain in incredibly sophisticated detail the physics of belief and the physics of our faith. We don't have to be an Abraham, but you know what we have to be? An ethical Abraham. We don't have to be Abraham with the university cap on, but we've got to be an Abraham ready by the tent, ready for some wayfarers to pass by. So it deliberately omits the first part of the story, the backstory, because that part of Abraham you don't need to be. If you're a theologian, great. Come, we'll schmooze. But you don't have to be. That's not a commandment. But you know what is a commandment? Every single person has to be ethical. Every single person has to care about charity and justice. And those are the stories that the Torah includes. That's the part that you have to be. That's not a choice. That's not up for negotiation. Theology, up for negotiation. Charitability, I don't know if that's a word, should be. Not up for negotiation. I remember I was sitting in my yeshiva. I went to yeshiva, as Eric said, in Baltimore. There's a place called Ner Israel. Great yeshiva. Yeshiva is a rabbinic study hall seminary. And the head of the yeshiva, whose name is Rabbi Aaron, better known Torah sages in the country. He actually married me and my wife. Old man, got a long, long white beard. And he gave an ethical discourse once a week to the entirety of the yeshiva. And I'll admit, I don't remember almost any of them. But there was one I remember because to me it was so powerful. And it was about Abraham. And he asked this question. And I think you'll appreciate this considering what I would have just shared with you. He said, what was so special about Abraham that at the age of 3 he did figure out there was one God? I'm telling you that he figured it out. But why him? Why was he the one to buck the trend? You know, it's not easy to create a whole new theology or philosophy and sort of break from the norms of society. It takes a big person. What was it about Abraham? Listen to what he said, folks. This is amazing. He said, who was Abraham? Abraham, like we said, he was a person who cared about others. He was able to see outside of himself. He saw the needs of others. See, many of us, we live lives where we're very much living inside of our own bubble. I remember, by the way, this is true. It's embarrassing, but it's true. When I was a child, I literally thought I was the only real one and everybody else was a robot there for me. Has anybody ever had that? Anybody else had that feeling when they were like a kid that they're the only real one? Anybody ever? You had that? Yeah. All right, at least we have some honest people in here. I remember as a child truly having that feeling, and as an adult, I had to slowly remind myself, it's not true. They're real. They're really real. But that's a very normal feeling that I'm the only real one. And the way it expresses itself is I only have to really worry about me. I don't need to consider the needs of those outside of me. But the moment that you start realizing that other people's needs and feelings are just as real and authentic as your own, now you've got to actually deal with that knowledge. Like, wow, their feelings and needs are just as real as mine. Does that mean that I've got to worry about them or care for them? Or how does that impact me now? It's a much bigger universe now than it was just yesterday. So the head of my yeshiva said, because Abraham was a person so focused on the needs of others, he was able to see outside of himself. He was also able to see outside of this world. The moment that you're able to see beyond the walls of yourself and to see the needs of others, that other people exist and that they're real, you're able to also look outside of the world and say, you know what? It's not just the world that I see. There's something beyond. And to me, there's a very deep connection between morality and the knowledge that there is one God. Number one, because of the expectation we have to be godlike. We have to inhabit those character traits that God is. But it also is a matter of seeing beyond. If I can see the needs of someone beyond me, maybe I can see the needs that God has. If I can see beyond me that there's another person, maybe I can see there's another entity. That's called Abraham. And his understanding that there's other things outside of his little bubble. There's other people and there's a God. Amazing. Ethical monotheism, the knowledge that something's outside of me and there's something outside of this world. That was Abraham. He was the original Carl Sagan. So I want to end with sharing with you one more insight about the relationship with God and Abraham. And it relates specifically to the nature of tests. Abraham's given 10 tests. Not easy tests, really, really difficult tests. And I think that the fact that Abraham specifically is given tests also shares with us what the unique relationship between Abraham and God was. We've spoken about faith. You spoke about faith earlier. Faith, imagine Abraham is told by God, Abraham, yes, it's me, God. Here I am. Go to a land that I'll show you. Okay. Where? I will show you. Okay. God doesn't tell him where to go. He knows where the journey begins. Go from where? Your land, from your home, from your relative, the place that you know. Where? To a land that I'll show you. All journeys of faith, the starting point is a point where we know. We're aware where the starting point is, and that's right here, right now. Abraham knows where he's got to go from. Where does he have to go to? He doesn't know. The journey of faith is not completely blind. The starting point is always known. It's the end point that lies in darkness. To a land that I'll show you. What Abraham taught us about faith is not so much that there are tests and that we've got to go somewhere. It's that the knowledge at the beginning is the easy part. Will you be able to get over that initial hump and have faith to go towards something that you cannot see yet? And by the way, why does God leave it ambiguous, clouded in mystery? For a very simple reason. Because what's the purpose of a test? God knows what you're going to do. He can fast forward to the end of the movie. Why does he even give you the test at all? And the answer is to bring out latent potential inside of you, so that that latent potential can come to the top. But guess what? If I told you how the story ends, you won't even be able to understand it, because right now you're a small vessel. And by the end of the test, you're going to be a bigger vessel. Imagine trying to tell a child, let me explain to you what you're going to be like when you're older and mature. Would they understand it? Not at all. And whatever understanding they would have would be a very muted understanding, a very limited understanding. It really wouldn't be an understanding at all. They would just think of, ooh, I'm going to have that many candies? That's really the way they would perceive it. However they perceive good now, it's just more good. More lollipops. I can't tell you where it ends because you wouldn't understand it. The point of the test is that when you get there, you'll understand, but you can't understand it now because you're you right now. And when you finish the test, you're not going to be you anymore. You're going to be someone else. And so the end point is cloud and mystery, hidden. The faith isn't to start the journey. The faith is to go through all the obstacles not knowing where it'll end. And to have trust that God is good and that, you know what, he's taking me to where I need to be. And I'm willing to go through fire and water in order to get there. It's the end which is the blind part. But it's not blind at all because you know God told you to go. The word emunah in Hebrew is faith. Emunah. E-M-U-N-A-H. In Hebrew, Aleph, Mem, Vav, Nun, Hey. Emunah. See, emunah doesn't actually mean faith. There really is no word for faith in Hebrew. Did you know that? Emunah is the closest word I can tell you to faith. And the reason is, if God tells us to do something, no faith is really required. Imagine if God came down and said, go to a land that I will tell you. Would you feel like, wow, I have to believe? It's like, no, I mean, just like we're talking, God speaks to us. I mean, nothing hidden about that at all. There's no faith is required. But you know what emunah means? In Hebrew, it comes from the word ne'eman. It means loyalty. No word for faith in Hebrew. You know what there is a word for? Loyalty. What faith truly is, and what Abraham teaches us through his tests, is now that you know that there's one God, and now that you know there are expectations, you've got to be God-like, and now that you know that you need to be obedient, and you know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, you just got to trust that you got to go through it, go through all the obstacles in order to get to that inline. Will you stay loyal to that which you know? That's it. The test of life is not faith, but loyalty. Will you remain loyal to that which you know? Marriage, very similar. There's no faith required. The question is only loyalty. Will you stay loyal to this relationship? That's it. It's not an easy thing at all, because I know where it begins under the canopy. I don't know where it ends. Through a lot of darkness and obstacles. But will I remain loyal? Emunah. No word for faith, words for loyalty. It's the same thing with our relationship to God. It's not about faith, it's about loyalty. If you have loyalty, you have faith. Will you stay loyal even though you don't know how the story ends? The end is cloaked in darkness. That's what Abraham teaches us with this story. And the words, go to a land that I'll show you, and this is where I always add in, if you don't know Hebrew, you're missing a big part of the story. But do you know how God tells him to go to a land that I'll show you? He doesn't just say, go to a land I'll show you. He says, lech lecha. You know what lech means? Lech means go. Lecha, go for yourself. It's generally just translated as go to a land that I'll show you. But the actual definition is go for yourself to a land that I'll show you. In other words, the purpose of the test is what? Go for yourself. Because the purpose of the test, God knows how it's going to end. The question is, are you going to be able to express all the latent potential inside of yourself? Go for yourself. In the end of the day, the journey is about you and your possibilities, your potential. And if you're able to see past the darkness all the way at the end and be faithful, or in my words, be loyal to what you know you've got to accomplish and what you've got to do, wow, oh, wow, you're going to be going to yourself. There's going to be a whole new you on the other side, a whole new potential, all sorts of possibilities for the kind of person you can become at the end of that test. So, Abraham, special man. The lessons we learned today, and what we learned really from Abraham, again, is we don't have to be theologians, but we do have to be kind and just, and therefore those stories are kept in the Torah. The theological underpinnings of the Abraham story, deleted. Why was he the one who was able to come to know God? Because he was able to see outside of himself to the needs of other people. And the moment you're able to see outside of yourself, you can also start seeing outside of the mask of this world that there's a creator. And finally, the lesson of the tests. The beginning, the starting point of the test is always clear. It's the land that I'll show you. It's the end that's cloaked in darkness. And the question is, will we be ne'eman? Will we be faithful to that journey? Will we be loyal to that which we know, to follow through and go through all the obstacles of life to get to that end point? And if we do, if we stay sturdy, and if we act upon our loyalty and our faith, what we will come to on the other side is ourselves. A bigger, brighter, more magnificent us, me, the person on the other side of the test. A much bigger vessel than the person who began. Lech lecha, go for yourself.